All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Some housekeeping things first before we get started. My name is Daisy Linares, and I will be your organizer today. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. Please remember to submit your text question and comments using the question panel. Question panel will be answered at the end, or if you are asked to submit questions during the presentation, you can also use the question panel. There will be a survey at the conclusion of the webinar, so please take a minute to fill it out. You will receive an email with the resources discussed today, along with a copy of the PowerPoint and a link to this webinar video. It should go out the next business day. All right, and we are passing to our presenters.
Good afternoon. This is Melissa Rivera-Serna, and welcome to Grow NJ Kids webinar entitled Effective Coaching. Sorry about that. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon entitled Effective Coaching with ITERS and ECERS, Keep Calm and Teach On. It is presented to you by myself, Melissa Rivera-Serna, one of the technical assistant supervisors for our Center Region North, and
Holly Kaczynski. Hello, everybody.
And we have Lisa Brezen. So to get us started, I'd like to bring you to the page where our agenda is. We give you a warm welcome again, and the next couple of slides will depict our key objectives. We also will be conducting a poll to see who our audience is for today. We'd like to know who we're speaking with. And we are going to be concentrating on four particular items found in both the ECERS 3 and ITERS 3 tools, which are whole group time, staff-child interactions, expanding vocabulary, also encouraging communication, as well as classroom displays. We will end with a summary of our objectives, and there is a page that at the end of the presentation that has a list of resources, as well as we will be sending some resources with handouts.
For all of those who complete our survey at the end.
Correct. So first off, it is our hope that at the end of our presentation today, the learner will be able to list and describe the purpose of each of the environmental rating scales, ERS, using common language. The learner will also be able to demonstrate some practical strategies for coaching using the ERS, and the learner will be able to apply a step-by-step plan for ongoing support. So here's our poll page. This is a time where we would like you to please answer whether or not you are a lead teacher, teacher assistant, a program director or administrator, or a coach and consultant, or other. So if you could just take a moment to identify yourself, and we will play some Jeopardy music while we wait for your response. Shouldn't take too long to get the tally. Okay, we're sharing the poll results now. I have to do something here.
Okay, so you have for lead teacher, teacher assistants, 21%, program director and administrator, 68%, coach consultant, 4%, other, 7%.
So it looks like we have the majority are possibly teachers and directors. So let us again welcome you, and let's get started with sharing first off the environmental rating scales. So there are 4 scales within the environmental rating scales. Each were designed for a different segment of the early childhood spectrum. The blue scale on your top left is the infant toddler environmental rating scale, otherwise known as ITERS 3, and it is designed to assess group programs for children from birth to age 3. The yellow scale on your top right of the screen, it's entitled Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale, otherwise known as ECERS 3, is the instrument designed for preschool, kindergarten, and childcare classrooms serving children 36 months through 5 years of age. Bottom left is the purple book. It's the School Age Care Environmental Rating Scale, and this one is designed to assess before and after school group care programs for school-age children 5 through 12 years of age. Finally, the green book is the Family Child Care Environmental Rating Scale, otherwise known as FICRS R, and this one is designed to assess family child care programs of mixed ages conducted in a provider's home. Please note that all 4 scales measure the physical environment, the equipment and materials offered to the children, and learning opportunities and activities that are provided, as well as building of language and literacy, the interactions of teachers and children, as well as children and their peers. All 4 of these scales are measured on a scale of 1 to 7. 1 as meaning inadequate, 3 meaning minimal, which would probably stand in line with Office of Licensing standards, 5 meaning good, and 7 for excellent. So as we talk about the ERS, we can say that these are used by program directors for supervision, development of program improvements, and for coaching. It can also be used by teaching staff for self-assessment and or reflection to build best practice. It can be used by agency staffs for monitoring and or teacher training programs. And today we will attempt to depict for you how the ERS can be an effective coaching tool for teachers. So please note the ERS tools are also utilized worldwide as they have been translated into many different languages, and they assist programs in identifying their strengths as well as areas for consideration. Note that there may be some items within the tool that cannot be considered for improvement, such as your physical space. An example I have for you is perhaps you have shared bathrooms located out in the hallway, or you may have you may not have an extra sink in your classroom for hand washing, or perhaps you don't have adequate indoor space for gross motor play. So these are the kind of items that cannot be addressed easily, but there are many, I should say, items that can be addressed. For example, teacher-child interactions that we will be talking about today, that can totally be considered and strengthened to the point where achieving scores in the 7 for excellent is very doable. So you might ask yourself, why use a program assessment tool such as ITERS 3 or ECERS 3? Program assessments such as the ERS are required by Grow NJ Kids and many other quality improvement systems around the nation. The main reason it is embedded within our Grow NJ Kids standards is because it proves to help build quality in childcare programs. And we have seen this firsthand with many of the programs that we are working with. All 4 ERS tools address 3 basic needs of children, which are the following. First is health and safety. Health and safety, when I talk about health and safety, this again would be building upon what Office of Licensing standards require. Some of the things that are being measured are personal hygiene, as well as ways the program reduces risk for infectious diseases, maybe looking at supervision during indoor and outdoor play, and what precautions are taken to reduce and avoid injuries. The second is building of relationships. This comes through the knowledge of child development and teachers, understanding the individual needs of their children. When speaking about relationships, there should be frequent intimate interactions, a way of handling the separation of a child from their parent. And when we talk about the caring of infants and toddlers, we should be really looking at smaller ratios, continuity of care, having a primary caregiving practice, as well as utilizing positive approaches to discipline and development of social skills. Lastly, there's opportunities for stimulation and learning. Again, this is looking at a variety of hands-on activities that are appropriate for group and individual needs, having many open-ended materials, having schedules that handle routines and transitions gracefully, while allowing ample time for free play activities, language-related activities, and other concepts that are brought through play. This concludes our introduction of the ERS and understanding of the use of common language in measuring quality within the scales. Now, we will turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Brezen, who will be speaking on whole group time.
Hi, everyone, Lisa here. As we delve into these very complex tools, we really want to try and make them accessible. Oh, can you go back, please? We really want to try and make them accessible to directors and teachers and help you see how extremely useful they are for long-term classroom support. Through our work with centers across the state, like Melissa mentioned, we see and we know how extremely difficult it is for directors to incorporate time for ongoing support and coaching in on classroom practices, especially for a one-woman band who wears lots of hats and plays many instruments. But we've also found that it is the one component that makes or breaks a center's ability to maintain and continue quality. So that's why we felt this was so important. Whole group times tend to be one of the most difficult parts of the daily routine to get absolutely right, because in essence, it's not really the best way for young children to learn. It's a great way to expose your entire class to certain things and give them the chance to collaborate and interact, but children 0 to 5 really do learn best one-on-one and in small groups, which is more individualized. On this next slide, you'll see the ITERS 3 and ECERS 3 items for whole group time. And you can see that they're pretty similar with common threads that run through them and common language. And by threads, I mean that there's examples of certain things at every level of quality, from inadequate at the level 1s all the way through to excellent at the level 7s. Some of the main threads that run through these items are the appropriateness of activities and the length of these activities. Are the children interested and engaged? And are the adults supportive to children who are having trouble? And are the children allowed to choose alternate activities? If through the ECERS or ITERS, teachers are finding that their whole group times, circle times, story times are less than stellar, it's time to really look at what is happening during these times and to sort of come back to the root of why we have them in the first place. And when teachers are having trouble with this part of the daily routine, one way to help figure out what's going on is to do a simple observation using the tool as a guide. On this next slide, you'll see a sample observation sheet that I created so that you could see what a circle time observation might look like. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but after we're done, you'll have a recording of this webinar, and then you can go back to this slide and examine it more closely. When you do this type of observation, it's really important to keep it to just the facts. No personal opinion about how you felt the kids were reacting to it. For example, in this first part of the circle time observation, you see that the teacher or the teacher assistant had to tell the kids 8 times to sit nice. Those little tick marks you see represent how many times the observer heard this from the staff. And when you record observations, you might say something like, 3 children were turned around with their back to the teacher. You wouldn't say 3 children were bored and not enjoying the book. You might also want to point out how the children were almost completely disengaged after 20 minutes. And whole group time should really be no longer than 10 or 15 minutes. 20 minutes max for older kids that are really interested in what's going on, but no more than 15 minutes. An important part of changing practice, any practice, is that the person undergoing the change needs to see the purpose for themselves. So when you reflect with your teacher about the observation, you'll ask the teacher what they notice about the observations. Draw attention to the number of children that are engaged and what was happening during the most successful parts of the activity. And this is a really important part that I can't stress enough, is to point out the positives of the observation, because it's necessary to recognize what is working. And we can't fault teachers for wanting there to be more rigor and more concept learning, and they're just doing it in the way that they think is best. So we don't want to squash that spirit. We just want to increase awareness that there are ways to go about it that are more developmentally appropriate, in ways that are really meaningful to the child. I want to revisit the slide with the ECERS and ITERS item on it. If you could just go back to that slide. Thank you. You can then, after the observation, go through the item and look at the levels 1, 3, 5, and 7 with the teacher, and think about where they are now and where they would like to go. And you'll want to check in every few weeks to see how things are going. And this ongoing support and feedback are crucial for this to work. So I'm going to give you some ideas for some developmentally appropriate greeting time activities. If we could advance to that slide, please. Here are a few key concepts that a quality whole group time can address. Again, for the sake of time, we're just going to review these, and there's lots of photos, so hopefully those will give you a feeling for what this all looks like. Developing a sense of community. This is the key purpose for greeting time. It's a time to get everybody together, to start your day, to share the news, maybe do a social emotional activity, some sort of group problem solving, or a name game, or a friendship song. But this is really the time when you reinforce and support the classroom community. On the next slide, you'll see some ideas for marking the passage of time, or sequencing time, aka the calendar. For toddlers and twos, you'll see 3 photos in the top right corner where there's children that are connecting beads or stringing large beads or stacking blocks. These are completely acceptable, developmentally appropriate ways of tracking time for toddlers. And each day when you meet, you would have a child add a bead or add a block, and at the end of the week, they see how many days have passed. You count a little bit, but really what they know about time and the passage of time, this is what's appropriate for toddlers and twos. For pre-K, you could go a little bit deeper. On the bottom right, you see a week-long calendar and the 2 little houses for Saturday and Sunday, and this is where they can track days before and after, upcoming events, different things. It's a more manageable way of understanding the passage of time. If you do use a monthly calendar, maybe towards later in the year, using something, tracking the passage of time of something relevant for them will really make it engaging and not a chore. A long-term science project, or tracking the weather every day, something that they are invested in and that they will have interest in every day doing. The exposure that children should get to calendar and tracking time is not a daily drilling with a big calendar, having to memorize the names of the days and the months and numbers to 30, because that's not a developmentally appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds. We have to remember the entire reason why a calendar is used and understanding the long-term passage of time. On this next slide, you'll see some examples of what will we do today. For toddlers and twos, simply showing an item that the children might use that day and having a discussion is suitable, something that they can, kind of a touch point that they can look for during that day. On the bottom, you'll see two examples of a morning message that the children can read by using simple pictures and familiar words. And this should be a visual representation of the day that children can go back to at any point during the day to kind of refer to. And on this last slide is just some music and movement, songs with props and movements, familiar songs, new songs. It's a great time to introduce that. And we won't go back to it, but on that sample observation sheet, the most successful part of that circle time observation was when the teacher engaged the children with a puppet and a song. So sometimes just adding that little prop or adding some sort of physical movement takes it to the next level. So now Melissa is going to take over for our next portion about staff-child interactions.
Hello again, this is Melissa, and I will be speaking to you on the item entitled Staff-Child Interactions. We all know this is a topic of content that we could probably spend an entire day on, as it deals with social emotional development of children, which is the foundation for all academic learning. But as we speak about staff-child interactions and interactions, the term itself, this refers to the ways in which staff relate to children under their care. When we talk about interaction, there's three classifications that are usually utilized, and that would be positive, negative, or neutral. It is understood that the number of positive and negative experiences in our lives is what molds us, and the number of neutral interactions has very little effect on us. In fact, they're usually forgettable. The notes in the ERS speak about how the impact of negative interactions on the recipient is stronger than the impact of either positive or neutral interactions. All three types of interactions will occur in differing amounts, and it is up to the observer to see the average effect of all interactions on all children in the group. Interactions includes two forms of communication: verbal and nonverbal. In verbal communication, this would be referring to us seeing lots of talking, giving praise, providing positive comments, talking at eye level, listening carefully to the children, commenting on activities, perhaps narrating what is going on, whether your own actions or the actions of the children. When we speak about nonverbal communication, we would be looking at whether or not teachers are sitting close to the children, are on the floor with the children, smiling with the children. Providing matched affect is very important. Making eye contact, modeling friendliness, using welcoming body language, gestures, being sure to put your focus on the children, your full focus and attention on the children, and being aware of your facial expressions. This is all verbal and nonverbal communication that takes place between adults and children. And my colleague Holly will be speaking further about communication. Do you know that according to John Gottman's study about adult relationships, it takes 5 positive interactions to overcome 1 negative interaction? This makes me wonder about the number it would take to counterbalance the negative interactions for children ages 3 to 5. I would imagine it would be doubled, probably a 10-to-1 ratio. And maybe for infants and toddlers, that number might even be higher. So on this next slide, you'll see there are the indicators, only indicators 1 and 3 for staff-child interactions found in ITERS 3, number 28, and ECERS 3, number 30. So as we look at this, you see the indicators under the ones are written in the negative language. These indicators should be answered no, as we want teachers to be responsive to children and provide a pleasant environment, pleasant interactions. There should never be any negative or neglectful actions on the part of a caregiver towards a child. As we move over to the indicators under the 3s column, Remember that this is the minimal level, so it is expected that teachers are already doing these things. You're already providing positive interactions, being generally patient, and providing pleasant atmosphere for the children. Staff are really providing positive interactions with the individual children and exhibiting enjoyment in being with the children. There are additional tips that can be found regarding the ITERS 3 and ECERS 3 through the William Patterson University, New Jersey Center for Quality Rating. That will be listed on our resource page. This next slide shows the staff-child interactions under the indicators for 5 and 7. Now, this is the higher end of the staff-child interactions where we see good to excellent scores that come into play. This is where the positive staff-child interactions should be evidenced and be considered frequent. And when we say the word frequent, this means more often than not, that according to Deb Cryer, one of the authors of the ERS. In other words, there shouldn't be any periods of lull or dead silence or long periods of no interactions. Again, the atmosphere should be cheery, calm, relaxed, and pleasant. This should be observed throughout the observation time. And at the 7 mark, where this is where all children in the group should have received individual positive interactions in the ITERS 3 tool, and staff exhibit positive guidance, respect, and sensitivity to all children in the ECERS 3 tool. Signs of support and comfort should be evidenced, especially when children are hurt, feeling anxious, fearful, or angry. And this is where those nonverbal cues really come into play on how teacher responds and to the child. So I've come up with a metaphor for teacher interactions with children that I've been using lately. And I say that children are blossoming flowers, and teachers, well, teachers can either be a butterfly or a bee. Both butterflies and bees have relationships with flowers. Butterflies flutter about the flowers, and not all flowers, just some particular flowers that they are drawn to. Also, butterflies unamusingly touch each of the flowers and manage to pollinate haphazardly. Now, bees on the other hand, they're truly a source of spreading the love through their pollination. When the bees do so, they receive nectar, which is then converted into honey for the service that they provide. The relationship between bees and flowers is certainly all the more sweet. Bees truly benefit from their interactions with flowers. Bees are driven, hardworking, and possess a true desire and a mission to complete their work. While I see butterflies just fluttering about, I really do see bees as intentional. So how can you be intentional with your interactions? How can you be sure you are providing positive guidance or positive reinforcement? In Noster's book, entitled, So How Hard is Using Reinforcements, he provides us an understanding of the importance of keeping a 4-to-1 ratio in the classroom when referring to the number of positive reinforcements to the number of corrections for a negative behavior. We all know that positive and negative are powerful feedback processes in the human behavior. Positive feedback obviously encourages us to continue doing what we have done so far, whereas negative feedback, on the contrary, generally acts as a warning signal telling us to moderate or stop what we are doing. The notion of the 4-to-1 ratio, by the way, is not an arbitrary number or concept. It is based on practical experiences in terms of what has been proven to be effective. So it is recommended that teachers periodically self-monitor your reinforcement practices within your classroom. Directors can do this utilizing this chart, for example. Now, there are several ways a teacher can do this. Noster suggests placing 20 corn kernels on popcorn in your right pocket and 20 in your left pocket. Each time you catch a child being good and you provide positive feedback, you remove the corn kernel from your right pocket. Likewise, when you must correct a behavior, you remove a corn kernel from your left pocket. For example, 0 kernels remain in your right pocket because you delivered 20 positive feedback versus 15 remaining in your left pocket because you delivered 5 reinforcements to correct the behavior. So if you do this, you can do this in time intervals, and you would see that this 20 to 5 would convert to 4 to 1 ratio of positive reinforcement versus the corrective feedback. And if you do it in time intervals, you would want to do it maybe for an hour versus an entire day. You can also do this for a group process or simply focus on one individual child to have an individual assessment. Other examples that Noster placed in his book was placing a loose piece of tape on your left and right wrists and using a marker with tick marks. Another suggestion that I heard recently from Gigi Schorkert, not sure if I pronounced her name right, is to place colored hair ties on your wrists and place them from left to right or right to left to keep track. Whatever system you decide to use the one that works for you, but try to self-monitor as often as you can. Now, for the use of coaching, I would like to share some reflective questions with you. If you're a teacher, you may pose these questions to yourself, or if you're a director, these might be some helpful questions that you might want to use when coaching your teachers. The first question is, as teachers or leaders, you may ask yourself, what is the classroom culture? What is the climate in my classroom? I really believe that teachers set the classroom environment. And as a leader, teachers set the foundation for their classroom culture. Another question you might ask yourself, what can you do to help center yourself for a more positive mindset before entering the classroom each day? Perhaps you can do some breathing exercises or go for a walk or meditate or read some inspiring quotes or listen to your favorite music. Think about what you can do to help center yourself before entering the classroom each day. A third question is, how can you incorporate more positive experiences for the children in your classroom? This is where I always refer to the website for the Center of Social Emotional Foundation of Early Learning, CEFL. Teachers need to build their toolkit. You can visit that website. It's listed at the resource page at the end. And you can obtain ideas for tools for your classroom to build social emotional development. It really has some great resources listed there. This last question, what are some ways you can set positive foundations? I'd like to take a poll. So I'm going to ask, with regards to these 5 attributes, if you could take a moment and choose which of the following attributes you find most important with regards to ways of behaving in the classroom. And our time starts now.
Okay. Daisy, do you have our results?
Yes. We have 30% for respect, 52% for positive guidance, and 19% for consistency.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in our poll. And positive guidance was the highest response.
Well, thank you for participating. It's funny that positive guidance would be number 1 and respect followed that. I find that all 5 are equally important as we think of these 5 words, I see them as equally important because they're connected with the word consistent, right? And consistent was the 3rd word on the poll that was the highest. See, if your students see and hear you making snide comments, using sarcasm, or ignoring the needs of others, they will begin to reflect that negative attitude. If your students see you and hear you make positive comments and encourage others, they will begin to reflect kindness, the same kindness that they see in you. And with regards to respect, if you treat your students with respect, by doing so, you're modeling for them what respect looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And although it won't happen overnight, when students see you consistently showing respect, they will begin to exhibit that same behavior. The key word here is consistent. If you are respectful one day and shouting the next day, well, that behavior of your students will not change. You will have those who will always challenge you to the brink of insanity, possibly, and those who chip away at your patience, but you must continue to behave in a positive way towards them. Lastly, positive guidance and sensitivity. Both must be observed. Remember, your positive guidance will provide support for the kind of behaviors you want to see, and your sensitivity will help the children know you can be trusted. This, in turn, will build confidence and self-esteem in the children under your care. Lastly, teachers, I encourage you to be our worker bees and be sure to spread the love in your staff-child interactions. Now I will turn it over to Holly Kaczynski.
Hi, everybody. How are you today? I'm going to be talking about encouraging and expanding vocabulary. This would be in both the ITERS and the ECERS in the language and literacy sections of those tools. Okay, so this is a very busy slide. It contrasts the ITERS item 10, encouraging language development, vocabulary development, with the ECERS item 12, helping children expand vocabulary. You'll notice that in the column 1 on the left-hand side, the words are identical. They're not identical in the in each of the 2 tools. For space limitations, I had to summarize what the intent was of each of these indicators. However, you'll see that the content, the ideas behind what the first column is intending are exactly the same. So even though the infants and toddlers may not be speaking to you, staff should be speaking to them. If you move over to the 3 section, you'll see staff are using specific names for people, places, and other categories of words in routines or in play. That's the same as in the ECERS because you're reinforcing what the children come in contact with each day. The staff are talking appropriately for the age and the ability of the child. That's in both scales. So your expectations are developmentally appropriate. And you're talking about classroom materials or display or children's concrete experiences. We'll cover that in a little more detail shortly. In the 5 column, moving from left to right, you can see that the expectation is that you're going to be using specific names for things and actions, etc., in routines and in play. So there's a lot of communication happening throughout the day. Staff is reinforcing learning of vocabulary words by repeating words for children so that they can hear them many times. And the talk doesn't just include what's happening in the moment, but also what might have happened yesterday, who ate what for dinner last night, and maybe what's going to happen tomorrow. If the weekend is coming and the weather's warm, does your family have plans to go somewhere outside? The other category here in the ITERS is that the staff are making comparisons and contrasts to help children understand words. Oh, you're going under the play structure. Oh, look, you're trying to climb over. What would that look like? Just because the child is not using those words over and under doesn't mean that you aren't continually exposing them to that language. And then in the last column, it talks about staff using a wide variety of types of words and explaining verbally the meaning of words, and that there is attention paid to changing materials and displays with the intent of introducing new words and ideas. In the ECERS, in the 7.3 indicator, it talks about staff adding information and ideas to expand the meanings of the words that children are already using. You might be giving alternate words if a child is talking about being happy. Are you ecstatic? You look very enthusiastic today. So expanding and providing alternate high quality words. So I want to talk, even though this slide doesn't have anything specifically about books, about the importance of books and the assistance that they can provide for assisting with vocabulary development, and that the books can introduce words that you might not have in your normal speaking vocabulary, but that you are encouraging the children to use and that you're going to use more frequently. For example, for those of you who may be using Creative Curriculum, one of the books that is in that book packet is Caps for Sale, about a peddler and the many hats he has stacked on his head and some mischievous monkeys who try and steal them. So mischievous is not a word that's used in the story. It's not literally written in the story, but it is something that's implied. So you might want to bring that out. And the literacy cards that are included in the intentional teaching cards in Creative Curriculum can assist you with that. Words that are used in the story are disturb, ordinary, finally, and refreshed. Again, refreshed might not be a word that you would normally use, but imagine a child taking a drink of water and smacking their lips and going, ah, or you could do that as you take a drink of water and say, I feel so refreshed. It reinforces the words introduced in the story, and it helps the child see how it could be used in typical speaking language. So we're going to watch a little video here, and hopefully it'll play without incident.
Let's keep on being quiet. And now I learn how to use our words. And then we go closer, closer, and line. Let me show you where it starts. That's my friend. There's our teacher. South Tucker. I was top 40. This is the time that you will start talking one children. You're beginning to put work together, even though you may not understand this yet. So we want to learn from you. But the talking shouldn't stop there. That's Miss Fredericks. She never told me to
Well, I've just been informed by one of our monitors that it's a lovely pictorial video that none of you could hear the narration for. And since the entire purpose of the video was to talk about vocabulary and turn-taking and communication, well, that's what happens sometimes. So this particular video is called The Promise to George's Children. It is on YouTube. And so if you Google it, The Promise to George's Children, you will be able to watch it outside of this presentation. It's from the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, and it is meant to demonstrate visually the importance of having conversations with children from birth through age 5 and beyond. And it's important that the classroom have lots of language, that being quiet is not what's supposed to be happening in school, that your role is to facilitate communication. It's really a great video, so I hope you seek it out on the internet. And I apologize for our technical difficulties. So this particular slide is from a booklet called More Than Baby Talk that was produced by the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. That is the same a school where the ERS scales were developed. The booklet is downloadable and it's 24 pages long and you can print it. It has specific suggestions for each of these practices about how to become more language-based throughout the day in your classroom, because we know that early language and communication skills are really crucial for children's success in school and beyond. And these skills include not just the ability to express oneself, but the ability to understand others, to listen using words or gestures or facial expressions. I'm sure many of you have heard the rubric about how much of communication is in the words that are spoken. Depending upon what research you look at, it's anywhere between 10 and 20% of what people understand that you're saying is the words that you speak to them. The rest of it is your nonverbal communication, your body language, your tone of voice, and what your facial expression looks like. So this guide is set up to give you not only strategies, but also research evidence that supports the practice and some examples. I want to comment on number 2, be a commentator, because there are 2 aspects to this, and how I remember these 2 aspects is the image of a sportscaster versus the image of a cooking show host. So we're in baseball season and the sportscaster is talking about, and Johnny hit the ball and it went far out into left field and he ran as fast as he could to first base and he's safe. So that's narrating the actions that someone else is doing. So in the classroom, Billy, look at the building you built. That looks terrific. And how did you make it so high? And what are the blocks that you used? By the way, not asking the questions in a big long stream like that, but pausing for the child to answer before you move on to the next question. And from a cooking show host, if you can imagine, there was in the video, which I wish you had been able to see, someone who was changing a diaper, and she was talking to the child about the actions she was taking. And so that would be the cooking show host. I'm going to take your pants off now. We are going to get a nice clean diaper. Let's get all cleaned up. So there will be a link to the booklet at the end of this presentation, as well as a handout that will give you the URL. So research from Harvard tells us it's not just the words used, but the number of back and forth exchanges, the conversations that are affecting the development of children's brains. Again, a link will be at the end of our presentation as in the resources page. So I want to touch briefly on encouraging communication and language and encouraging children to use language. I highlighted in red the words that I think you need to think about when you're talking about encouraging communications. Number one in the upper right-hand corner is turn-taking, very critical. In the 5-level staffer, initiating, engaging conversations, and the word asking questions and appropriate interactions. They're all over this. Encouraging more talk, communicate verbally. Children talk most, not teachers talk. And so in summary, are we talking with or are we talking out? At. Listen attentively to each individual child. Ask relevant questions that relate to the child's interest. Wait for the response. Assist children to communicate and remember to have conversations. I want to touch a little bit on rote repetition and drilling of letters because I have seen this in classrooms, and I want to give you this as a little food for thought. This is the last slide in my presentation, and if you think about letter names versus letter sounds, there are only 6 letter sounds that correspond to the letter names: A, E, I, O, U, and R. The rest of the 20 letters in the alphabet don't have sounds that correspond to the letter name. And fun factoid, there are actually 44 phonemes in the English language, and a phoneme is the smallest piece of a word that are shared throughout all of the words in the English language. And if you have dual language learners in your classes, there are many more depending upon their home languages. And so I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague, Lisa Bresson, for classroom displays.
Hi, everyone, again. So if you could just, on this next slide, when we look at the ITERS and ECERS item for classroom displays, you can see that there's a thread that runs through this item that is no longer just about what's hanging up in the classroom, but it's how teachers and children are interacting with it. And that's the thread that we're going to focus on within this item. So you can see, for instance, at the level 1, actually it's in red at the bottom for the ECERS in the level 1. It says staff do not talk about display. Level 3, staff talk about display once. Level 5, staff talk about display 2 times. And at the level 7s, there's actually 2 indicators with staff talking about displays, pointing out words, using the display for informal conversations. So you can kind of see that it runs through the entire item. The child should always feel like this is their classroom, right? They should be able to go in and say, oh, and there's my painting, and there's my friend's Lego building, and the picture of my mommy, and then there's that thing that the teacher points to and makes us do with like 1,000 squiggles, and then there's the scarf hanging that's like my grandma's. So a child should always feel like that it's their classroom. So I challenge you to sit in the middle of your classroom when nobody's there and really look around at your walls. Look at the back of your shelves and ask yourself, does this feel like a teacher's classroom? Does it feel like the Lakeshore store up in Hackensack? Or does it feel like the children that work and learn and create there? And after you sort of step back and look at your environment from the child's perspective, think about how you can make it work for you and how you can make it your third teacher. What can you add or sometimes take away to maximize its meaningfulness and not just put stuff up because it's cute? Think about the ways that you currently use your classroom displays. Do you use them during circle time, or do you use them to display artwork? And if yes, then how do you and the kids interact with that artwork after it's been up? On this next slide, you'll see some examples of some mediocre toddler classroom displays. You'll see everything is really high up. This child is standing on a ladder to see her work. You see this gorgeous one in the top left corner with beautiful photos of the families that the kids can't see because it's way up high. And on the next slide, you'll see some really high quality toddler classroom displays. A colorful dynamic mobile that moves hanging from the ceiling, displays that children can see at their eye level and discuss with staff. If displays are low, things should be covered to protect from being torn, so you can laminate or use tape, or plastic sheet protectors work really well. You just slide the artwork inside and that keeps it from getting torn. In the bottom right corner, you see family books that are hanging from hooks that the kids can access at any time. And if you do have displays high up, that's okay too in toddler classrooms, but they should be large and easy to see, not small detailed photos. So now we're going to look at a few photos of some really high-level preschool classroom displays. In this photo, this is a mixed age group class of 3 and 4-year-olds, and their playground was under construction. So every week, the teacher took them outside with clipboards, and they drew the progress of the construction project. And they talked to the workers, and they just kind of saw what they drew. They drew what they saw and talked with their teacher. And in the next slide, you'll see that this is the display in the classroom. This is the display of the creations from that previous process. So you see the two girls are looking at it, and there's actually a photo of one girl making the drawing that's hanging there next to it. So think about how you might extend children's thinking about their experiences using this display and putting up the process and the creation together. And on this next slide, we were going to do a short processing activity, but we're going to kind of skip it. So I'm just going to leave you some food for thought. These are 3 very high-level interactive classroom displays that you might use in your classroom, and I'll just describe them briefly. The top one is photos of an object over a period of time. So this class was growing a plant, and they took photos, observational photos, and kind of tracked the progress of the growth. The center photos are a block structure, a 3D structure with photos taken from several different angles. And the bottom photo is 2 pieces of artwork by the same child, and they're both self-portraits, but they were created a couple months apart. So the child is now able to see their progress and see the change and notice the differences. So having these types of interactive, really high-level displays in your classroom just opens the door for high-level questioning and conversation. So after you've gone back to your classrooms, give these exercises a try and figure out what's really meaningful to the children about their classroom and how you can help create deeper connection, help them create a deeper connection to their classroom environment. Let them choose where they hang things up and how they hang things up. Definitely rotate materials that are up. Monthly is usually what people do. Rotating materials helps the children stay engaged with their environment. So for example, lots of people have colored shapes up in their circle time. For instance, they'll have a blue circle, a red triangle, and maybe a yellow rectangle. And they just kind of stay up on the wall in that area. And they've blended into the background at this, by mid-year for the kids, because they're not necessarily meaningful to the kids and they've become permanent on the wall. So to mix it up a little bit, take them off of your wall and put them on the ceiling, put them on the floor, put them around different parts of the room, and ask the kids, what do you notice that's different about this area? I wonder where the shapes went. And now the children are re-engaged with this part of the display that they hadn't really noticed before. So now they're on the hunt for these shapes in the classroom. And then you might say, where's the blue circle? Do you see any other blue circles in the classroom? So now it's become sort of another interactive part of the display. Because when something is up all the time, it starts to blend into the background. It's like walking past an item in your house. You might pass it 100 times and never notice it. But if you move it to a different part of your house, then it kind of becomes new to you again. And again, as a director, check in every few weeks. And this ongoing support is not a gotcha for a teacher. It's more to say, how are the changes going? What are you still having trouble with? But more importantly, what's something new that is working? And how can we do more of that? And back to Holly.
Hi, everyone. So here we are at the end of our presentation, and I hope you have a more in-depth understanding of the ERS indicators that we displayed for you to take a look at. This was not meant to be a comprehensive ITERS and ECERS, every indicator and every subscale examination. You'd have to be on the line with us for at least 8 hours for that to even be moderately effective. So in an hour, we hope we highlighted things that we've seen that would be good to shift practice in the classroom and for directors and teachers to think about a little bit differently. I hope we've given you some practical strategies that you're going to take back to the classroom that directors are going to be able to use to coach their teachers and for teachers to give suggestions to each other. So I challenge you to work on a step-by-step plan in your center, in your classroom for what you need in the way of support, what you need in support from your co-teachers or your director, and reach out to your technical assistant for those enrolled in Grow New Jersey Kids to see if there are additional resources you'd like to have, or if you'd like to sit down and have a longer conversation. We certainly appreciate your patience with us today on our technical foibles. That's a level 2 word, foible. Hopefully you will find it useful. Again, the resources are going to be emailed to you upon completion of the survey that we're going to ask you to take. And have a terrific day. Here are the contributions from the resources. We'll leave this slide up for a while, but again, it'll come to you as a handout. Have a great day and look forward to warm weather this weekend. 70 degrees, yes.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Once this webinar ends, the survey will come up. Thank you.